Hey y'all, it's actually Thursday now, but coming at you with your midweek check-in. I'm going to talk a little bit about this week and then also devote about half of this to discussing the final. Um, if I could read my own writing, let's see. So I actually have been really impressed with the discussions, especially around Sojourner Truth's dinner party plate. I feel like this class is could be an art class in another form. Maybe I'll add more art next time because people seem to really do well with it. I especially liked that Tiffany suggested that that the plate looked like breasts, and there was a connection to this legend of Sojourner Truth bearing her breasts to prove she was actually a woman at an abolitionist convention. Um, and I say legend because I think a lot of what we know about her has been potentially improved upon. There's a wonderful not autobiography, there's a wonderful biography of her by Nell Painter, and one of the things that she points out is that in her famous speech, Ain't I a Woman, Sojourner Truth actually never said ain't. She wouldn't have said ain't. She said aren't. She was born in New York State in the early 1800s, and her first language was Dutch. So the addition of her, the substitution for ain't, um, was an improvement later to make her sort of sound a little bit more like a little bit more southern, give people a dialect that they could more easily recognize and identify, um, and sort of create a character and a legend around her that's very different from the actual person. So I thought that'd be interesting to notice. Um, and I'm interested in in thinking about art as possibly an avenue to challenge a culture of violence and abuse against women. In Brianna's video, she was talking about the things that you can do if you're harassed on the street, including calling the cops. And I think that, of course, I want everyone to be safe. Um, but I have to say, unfortunately, that I've had a lot of experiences where, ev- for example, if you're in a bar, um, and somebody has grabbed me, and I actually had one where I was kicked out of the bar, not the person who grabbed me, for confronting him because I was being violent and or I was being crazy and unreasonable and whatever. So I think that unfortunately, a lot of times those authority figures aren't really there or don't really take us seriously, or think we should get over it, or think it happens all the time, which it does. Um, and so I'm curious about if anyone has any more recent experiences. Admittedly, I'm 33 now, so I don't get catcalled. I'm not out as much, and at 7 months pregnant, it happens a lot less to me as well. So I'm curious what some other people's experiences. Maybe you can comment on Brianna's video about what your experiences have been. Um, and then the main thing that I want us to think about for this week is looking ahead to the final. Now I've added it's I call it an info sheet. It's sort of like a rubric. It explains in great detail exactly how I'm going to grade the final paper that you will turn in as a result of your action. First, I want to make it clear that your group grade is going to be based on completing some sort of action, right? And for some reason, I had a problem with students understanding this last semester. One of my students wrote a paper and then just sort of appended a petition that she had never sent anywhere. And I said, no, you have to actually send out your petition. You have to actually um, put something out there, and that's because one of the things that you're asked to do in the paper is to evaluate the impact of what you did. And if you don't actually do it, you're not going to be able to evaluate the impact. So whatever action you have planned, make sure that you're executing it this week. We do not have a lot of reading for next week. So you have some time now. Make sure you're executing that action and that you're prepared to speak about how it went in retrospective in the paper. So I want to just give you a quick shot. I am hoping that you will read this very carefully on your own, maybe print it out. If you go under syllabus and assignments, experimenting with activism, oh, excuse me, sorry, then we have the final info sheet. And this is really designed to be, and one of the ways that I suggest you use it is you could download it and actually start writing on it. Write with it as a checklist. Answer every question and then, use that for your outline. Delete my wording, of course, by your final paper, but this is really a checklist of everything that needs to go into the paper, and it can be used very effectively for brainstorming for anyone who's having trouble getting started. And I really will be grading you in a 20-point scale on these items. So there's 5 separate items that each are 20 points each. Okay, totaling up to 100. And here's what they are. The first is to define a social issue. So this is the one that you've decided to work on, using some sources from the course material, and explain how it is relevant to the social inequalities discussed in class. You must clearly explain your social issue and why you believe it is important. You must explain how your issue affects women across different social identities. For example, race, class, abilities, sexuality, immigrant status, gender identity. And you really need to discuss at least one additional dimension other than gender. And this goes back to that opening question that I asked back in week 1, if we can remember, that was about women who come from a different position than you and what we might have in common. So I do want you to think about how one particular social issue might affect women in multiple groups who also have differences, right? We learned, for example, this week about how street harassment can particularly affect women of color and be inflicted differently, right? So those are the types of things that I'll be looking for. You must reference sources from the course material, and you may use additional references to explain your issue's relevance to the social inequalities discussed in class. For a lot of people might be working closely with, or might have a project that's very closely linked to an actual nonprofit, want to source them, or that's linked to some sort of policy initiative, and please go ahead and do reference that. Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me. 20 points. Define activism and explain how your project is activist. Providing a detailed description of how you constructed your project. You must define activism in your own words. So not the dictionary.com definition, please your own definition. If you feel the need to include something from somewhere else, cite it and then include your own definition anyway. And you must explain why your project meets the definition you created. What about it is activist? What about it facilitates social change? I want a good detailed description of the action you undertook, the tactics, the scope, etc. What was the goal? Did you raise awareness? Did you provide a forum for public discussion? Did you petition an organization? What was the medium of your activism? Did you use flyers, an online campaign, art, performance? How many people did you reach? Who were they? Did you reach anyone in a position of power or vulnerability? Okay, so really a thick, detailed description of what you did is a big part of just writing a readable paper so that people can kind of, and reporting back so that people can appreciate the work that has gone into it. You must provide a rationale for or a justification for the actions you developed, and you must evaluate your action in light of the course material. Okay, so let's just keep in mind this is also a final, so I'm going to be looking for you to make connections back to the lectures and course readings. Again, you may use additional references to support your rationale and support your definition of activism or discuss tactics. The next part is to evaluate the impact of your project. So again, you're not going to be able to do this if you don't actually execute the project. Okay, so this is part of the reason why it's so important. It is written into how I evaluate your paper that you have actually done this. Um, so evaluate the impact of your project. Did the medium of activism complement the message? If you had to do it again, what would you do differently to be more effective? I'm very aware that for most of us, this is the first ever thing that we've done that, could be considered social action. First activist project. That's part of the reason why it's called experimenting with activism, is that I don't expect that this is something that people have a ton of experience with coming into this class. But reflecting on it, I hope, my goal is that um, my students in this class will feel comfortable getting involved in issues related to their communities, um, even if or even national political issues, or whatever it may be. So, it is important to start thinking about, what you might do differently, how it went. So you must describe the concrete outcomes of your action. What did you actually accomplish? Did you meet your goal for the project? You must discuss both the strengths and limitations of your action. What would you do differently next time? What other tactics or techniques did you not use um, might be effective in addressing your social issue? And it's fine. I also recognize that some things we maybe didn't do because of feasibility, and that's okay too. Um, the next 20 points. Provide your reflections on the practicalities of collaboration and the significance of this type of activism for feminism. Um, Not only is group work, I think, very important for feminism because of our history as leaderless collectives, and because of our, overall commitment to inclusivity and tearing down hierarchies, but it's also actually one of Front Range Community College's um, student learning outcomes. When it comes to professionalism, teamwork is a big part of it and embedded in there, and it's something that that a lot of employers actually do say students lack, is the ability to work in teams. So again, that's something that I'm very excited you had a chance to work on here, and that I want you to think a little bit about. So going back to that self-assessment that you completed at the outset, I want you to discuss and reflect back on that self-assessment, um, and and think about whether and how you sort of lived up to your own expectations, or whether you changed some things, or whether you need to reevaluate yourself. You must discuss the logistical issues such as communications, resources, skills, and identify some improvements to make next time. Um, and then I'd also like you to, because I asked you to be very intentional in how you set up your groups, I want you to evaluate whether your relationship as a group reflected your values. What were the values of the group that you suggested? Was it equality, social justice, nonviolence? I know one group was debating whether they were going to sort of consider themselves feminists or humanists. And so I want to hear more about that and what that means to you, and how you lived those values in how you interacted with each other. Um, did any of the dimensions of social inequality manifest in your group? Theory teaches us that when we come together in groups, and we saw this when we read about Occupy Wall Street, that those hierarchies of gender and race tend to show up in our personal interactions, even when we have the best intentions and we don't want them to. So think about whether that happened. And then, was the division of labor equitable? Um, the final 20 points is really style. So overall documentation format, including your creativity, your appropriate citations, and use of visual aids where necessary. Please, if you wrote a petition or an open letter, included included in an appendix. If you went to a protest, please take a picture, send it to me. Put together a readable, attractive, accessible documentation. You must have an introduction, conclusion, some means of guiding readers. Cite all sources, and of course, as always, proofread, proofread, and proofread some more. Please send me an email if you have questions. I will be around on the discussion boards.